And don't forget to get on Facebook and send in your videos, and there's a couple in there. Let's talk to Harold the H. Peacock, our Ipswich historian from historyouthere.com. G'day, Harold.
Yeah, good morning, Danny. Yeah, there's lots of arc videos after you asked for them.
That's true, isn't it? There's a few on there.
Yeah, flapping arms, running down the hill, arcing, and thanking West Bremer Radio.
Next week we'll mention who they are on the program. Now you're going to tell us about a paternity case that happened 170 years ago. Not only rocked Ipswich, Queensland, but rocked Australia. Tell us firstly, what's paternity mean? Do you know what that means?
Well, paternity is the father. Who's the father of the child, and he's got to look after him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, most times. So let me tell us the story that rocked Australia.
Yeah, this was back in 1851. It was when Moreton Bay was still part of New South Wales, and the case involved one of the colony's richest and most eligible bachelors, and it might even have involved corruption and murder.
Oh, he's been sitting up till 2 a.m. researching this.
Well, it's all about the Gammy brothers. That's George and John Gammy from Aberdeen in Scotland. They were among the first squatters on the Darling Downs in the 1840s.
They squatted?
They squatted on a huge amount of land. Wow. But it was in 1850 when their maid, Esther Simmons, took John Gammy to court for refusing to support his illegitimate child. Gammy admitted being the father, and the Ipswich court made an order for maintenance, but Gammy simply ignored it. So Esther took the case to the Brisbane court. Again, he ignored it.
Right.
In desperation, the following year, Esther took her claim to the police court in Sydney. Now, the 32-year-old squatter, John Gammy, was very much a member of the squattocracy, which was that fraternity of landowners that squatted and settled Australia. And he was very rich and very eligible. The saga attracted evocative headlines like, "He loves and he rides away." And, Danny, there was even a 19-verse ballad that was called "Ye Squatter and Ye Nut Brown Maid." So it was headlines everywhere.
Oh, God.
Now, at first, the case of Sydney was postponed while they waited for the mail to arrive from Moreton Bay with a copy of the court orders, and that took a month. But once the orders arrived, still the judges refused to rule. Finally, a year after the story first started, the judges themselves were being asked to show cause why a writ from the Supreme Court should not be issued to force a case of maintenance to be decided. Eventually, John Gammy was ordered to pay 10 shillings a week for 12 months. But there's no evidence that any payment was ever made. And one of the two judges was Edward Flood. Now, Flood was an alderman in Sydney's first city council and later became mayor. Wow. In the year he was appointed a magistrate, he was fined £50 for punching a man who called all councillors idiots. And he himself, just like John Gammy, was a father of a number of illegitimate children and had made his fortune as a squatter, so maybe that explains his reluctance to rule against Gammy. Anyway, the Gammy brothers became very wealthy. They were worth hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money, and their stations on the Darling Downs were shearing in excess of 60,000 sheep.
Wow.
The homestead on their well-known Talgo run is still there today. But in May 1853, the empire began to crack when the partnership between the Gammy brothers was dissolved. Now, just 10 weeks later, John Gammy inexplicably died at his lodgings in Ipswich. He was just 34 years old.
Wow.
The ownership of all the runs were then transferred to his brother, George Gammy. George then sold the properties and took off to England. There he purchased the Shotover estate in Oxfordshire. Now that estate is huge, almost 2,000 acres in the best English countryside. And in recent times, it was owned by friends of the royal family, and the Queen was regularly visiting there. In fact, Princess Anne suffered a broken nose while falling off a horse when she was riding there.
Oh, where do you find this? Well, it's a fairly big protuberance to get knocked and broken.
Well, you've got to be careful when you're riding horses. But back to the case, because based on the orders issued by the court in Ipswich, John Gammy's illegitimate daughter Emily was the sole heir of half of the Gammy estate.
Wow!
In fact, Emily's descendants here in Ipswich today are entitled to half of a fabulous fortune.
Are there any relatives here?
Well, the birth was not registered, but by DNA, absolutely yes. You can track it by DNA, except there's one problem, Danny.
What's that?
George Gammy lost the lot when he went bankrupt in 1871.
Well,
So-
no use going getting my DNA done. I'm not even born in Ipswich. I was an Brisbane boy. But I told her you had a gammy leg.
Well, he
Well,
certainly
two
had a gammy
gammy
heart or
legs.
something.
No, 2 gammy legs. Because they're his legs and 2 gammy arms. 2 gammy and
Well,
one
but-
gun. Yeah.
That's right, but and it was a gammy paternity case because even though it showed there's a potential to share in a fortune, unfortunately there's no really Christmas present for all the descendants here, the listeners here today, unfortunately, Danny.
Well, you know what? Next week, you're going to talk about the railway guard that saved Christmas. And
That's right.
It's a good yarn.
It's a fantastic Christmas story. The Railway Guard. Look, Railway Guards are heroes for so many reasons, and here's a really good one on Christmas Day next week.
Now, my grandfather, Edward John Carl, was a railway guard around that time. Now, let me ask you, historyouthere.com, we've got to get people to get on the video themselves, running down a hill or doing something with flapping their arms and going, ark, 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 because Harold the H, ark, 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 Peacock is our Ipswich historian. Mate, thanks for what you do. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you next week on Christmas Day.
Certainly looking forward to it, Danny.
Oh, look, you are the ark man of Australian radio.
Danny, did you see the Ark video this morning?
No, I didn't. Where do we find that?
Mark from Tarragindi.
Yeah, history
It's
out
in-
there?
Historyouthere.com, it's there. It's amazing.
Mark from Tarragindi. Thanks for listening. Keep it tuned, West Bremer Radio. Ark, ark, ark.